The morning sun illuminated Norfolk Naval Base as Herman Butcher gripped the ship's railing, his legs trembling after 14 days crossing the Atlantic. What he witnessed through the June haze of 1943 contradicted everything 3 years of Nazi propaganda had taught him. American dockworkers, both white and black, operated machinery that seemed decades ahead of German technology. Women in coveralls controlled massive cranes. Children hawked newspapers at the gates. Most unsettling of all, nobody fled at the sight of enemy uniforms. Die Amerikaner sind verrückt, he whispered to the soldier beside him. The Americans are crazy. Butcher would later chronicle this moment in his 1952 memoir, Hinter Stacheldraht, Behind Barbed Wire, one of the most detailed accounts of German POW life in America. But even his careful documentation couldn't fully capture the cognitive dissonance of that first morning. The moment when 2,500 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps, the first major contingent of what would become 425,000 German prisoners in American camps, encountered a society that defied every expectation of how a nation at war should behave. The Norfolk base sprawled across 4,300 acres, its infrastructure dwarfing anything in war-torn Europe. In a single morning, this one port handled tonnage that exceeded Hamburg's weekly capacity. Yet it wasn't the scale that stunned the arriving prisoners, it was the normalcy. Civilians wandered freely near military installations. Vendors sold coffee and donuts within sight of warships. A brass band played Glenn Miller tunes at a nearby war bond rally, the music drifting across to men who had been taught that jazz was degenerate art. The processing began with what Butcher called the first impossibility. German military doctrine, refined through campaigns from Poland to North Africa, held that prisoners were either assets to exploit or burdens to minimize. The Geneva Convention was acknowledged when convenient, ignored when expedient. Yet here were American officers reading Geneva Convention rules in fluent German, asking about dietary restrictions, inquiring if anyone needed kosher meals. Several Wehrmacht soldiers laughed nervously at the kosher meal offer, assuming it was mockery. It wasn't. The American military had genuinely prepared for the religious dietary needs of enemy prisoners, including hypothetical Jewish POWs from the German forces, a concept so foreign to Nazi thinking that many prisoners couldn't initially process it as real. The medical examinations defied military logic. German prisoners with infected wounds received penicillin, that miracle drug barely available to German field hospitals, on par with American soldiers. Swiss Red Cross Inspector Guy Métraux noted in his July 1943 report, medical treatment provided to German POWs equals or exceeds that given to American military personnel. Prisoners express continued disbelief at the quality of care. At the examination stations, black medical personnel served in integrated units, though not throughout the military. One documented incident involved a black medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine health screening. In Germany, such racial contact was legally forbidden. Here, it was military routine. The German officers submitted to the procedure in stunned silence, their racial ideology crumbling through simple medical necessity. The mess hall provided the next shock. German prisoners were led to a cafeteria where American sailors were eating. The two groups, Enemies who had been hunting each other in convoy battles ate in the same facility. Americans at one end, Germans at the other, sharing the same food lines, the same quality meals. The Americans showed no particular hostility, more interested in a radio broadcast of a baseball game than in their enemies sitting 50 feet away. The food itself stunned men accustomed to military rations: fresh eggs, real coffee, white bread, butter, jam, fresh fruit. Items that had become luxuries or memories in Germany were standard American military fare. Prisoners received 3,500 calories daily, nearly triple what German civilians were allocated when rations were available. The 3-day train journey to inland camps provided a rolling classroom in American abundance. Unlike the secretive prisoner movements in Germany, American authorities made no attempt to hide the POWs. The trains, not boxcars but actual passenger coaches with cushioned seats, stopped at regular stations where civilians gathered to stare. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., witnessed by hundreds and documented in station logs, German prisoners watched American families seeing off soldiers. Wives kissed husbands goodbye in full public view. Children waved small flags. Teenagers shared milkshakes at the station restaurant. The same platform hosted enemies and families, separated only by windows and guards who seemed more concerned with directing traffic than watching prisoners. The journey revealed an industrial landscape that should have been hidden, camouflaged, protected. Instead, factories displayed their names in enormous letters. The Glenn L. Martin aircraft plant in Baltimore had parking lots visible from the train, filled with workers' personal automobiles, thousands of them. Prisoners could count the B-26 bombers lined up for delivery. No concealment, no security paranoia, just American industry operating in plain sight. Through Pennsylvania, the trains passed coal mines and steel mills, running continuous shifts. The night sky glowed orange from blast furnaces that never stopped. Workers' housing, individual houses with gardens, not barracks, spread for miles around each complex. Electric lights burned in every window. Radio antennas sprouted from every roof. The casual display of electricity alone stunned men from a nation where blackouts were mandatory. Camp Hearn, Texas, opened in December 1942, would become home to 4,800 German prisoners in conditions that exceeded what many had known as civilians. The infrastructure challenged German understanding of prisoner treatment: wooden barracks with electric lights, indoor plumbing with flush toilets and hot showers, individual beds with mattresses and clean sheets, recreation halls with ping-pong tables, and libraries. The camp commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecil Stiles, addressed arriving prisoners in German. He had studied the language at university. He explained camp rules, but also something unprecedented. Prisoners would largely govern themselves within compounds. They would elect spokesmen, organize activities, manage schedules. Self-governance for enemies seemed like either supreme confidence or dangerous naivete. The camp hospital contained equipment many German civilian hospitals lacked: X-ray machines, surgical suites, dental facilities, and pharmaceutical supplies, including penicillin. When prisoner Georg Gärtner developed appendicitis in September 1943, he received immediate surgery from Captain William Calhoun, an Army surgeon from Dallas, with German POW medical staff assisting. The speed and quality of treatment exceeded what many German soldiers had experienced in their own military. But nothing prepared them for the camp canteen, a store where prisoners could purchase goods with scrip earned from voluntary labor: cigarettes, chocolate, soap, toiletries, writing materials, musical instruments, art supplies. The concept that enemy prisoners could shop, could exercise consumer choice, could have luxuries beyond basic survival, scrambled military thinking trained in scarcity and hierarchy. The labor shortage, by September 1943, led to widespread POW employment throughout Texas. Prisoners earned 80 cents per day in canteen scrip, the same base pay as American privates. At the King Ranch near Kingsville, German POWs encountered American agriculture on a scale that defied comprehension. The ranch covered 825,000 acres, larger than the state of Rhode Island. Ranch records show German prisoners worked alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and black ranch hands. This racial mixing in labor, though limited socially, contradicted Nazi racial hierarchy theories that placed Germans at the pinnacle of human development. Prisoners watched in amazement as a black foreman directed white and Mexican workers with easy authority, all focused on the task rather than racial dynamics. The mechanization stunned men from a military that still relied heavily on horses. Single combine harvesters replaced dozens of workers. Trucks, not wagons, transported crops. The ranch used small aircraft to survey cattle herds and spot strays. American agriculture employed more machinery than entire German armored divisions. At cotton processing facilities throughout Texas, POWs witnessed speeds impossible by European standards. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, employing POW labor from August 1943 to December 1945, processed more cotton daily than German mills handled monthly. Yet workers took regular breaks, ate full lunches, listened to radios while operating machinery. Productivity, through decent treatment rather than harsh discipline, contradicted Wehrmacht experience. American farmers' casual attitude toward authority stunned military minds accustomed to rigid hierarchy. FBI monitoring reports, declassified in the 1970s, recorded German POW amazement at farmers openly criticizing Roosevelt, complaining about government policies without fear. In one documented incident near Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell over crop allocation disputes. The farmer faced no arrest, no punishment, just continued farming while grumbling about government interference. In December 1943, the Hearn Democrat reported German POWs on supervised Christmas shopping outings, witnessing American teenage culture. Young people gathered at drugstore soda fountains, boys and girls together, unchaperoned. They danced to jukebox music, including jazz and swing that Nazi ideology labeled degenerate. They dressed fashionably despite wartime, showing no militarization of youth culture. American teenagers seemed to be enjoying themselves rather than preparing for racial struggle. American women's behavior particularly stunned the prisoners. Women drove trucks, operated businesses, supervised male workers at defense plants. At nearby Bryan Army Airfield, women Air Force service pilots, WASPs, flew military aircraft. Female pilots handling machines of war while wearing lipstick and fashionable hairstyles. This combination of femininity and competence contradicted Nazi ideology that confined women to children, kitchen, and church. Churches throughout Robertson County invited German prisoners to services. Records from First Baptist Church of Hearn, First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church document German POW attendance. The December 24, 1943. Ori 3, Hearn Democrat reported, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at multiple churches, sitting among congregation members whose sons serve overseas. No incidents reported. The Christmas service at First Methodist included a moment that broke several prisoners. The pastor asked the congregation to pray for American soldiers overseas, then added, "And Lord, we also pray for these men among us far from their homes, that they too might find peace." American civilians praying for enemy soldiers violated every expectation of wartime hatred. By early 1944, the Special Projects Division had established sophisticated educational programs. The camp library, initially 500 donated books, grew to 5,000 volumes by August 1944. The selection included works banned in Nazi Germany: Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, works by Jewish authors like Leon Feuchtwanger. German POWs could read books that would have meant death to possess in their homeland. Sam Houston State Teachers College provided correspondence courses. College records show 340 German POWs enrolled in courses including English, American history, mathematics, and agricultural science. Professors visited monthly to conduct lectures and examinations. The concept of enemies receiving American college education while American boys died in Europe seemed to defy logic, yet it proceeded with full institutional support. The camp newspaper, Der Spiegel, the Mirror, showed remarkable evolution. Early 1943 editions contained subtle Nazi propaganda. By late 1944, articles discussed democratic theory, analyzed American films, and debated post-war reconstruction. The transformation wasn't forced, but organic, emerging from exposure to American ideas and extended discussions among prisoners beginning to question their indoctrination. Christmas 1943 at Camp Hearn became legendary among prisoners. The town of Hearn, population 2,000, mobilized to ensure enemy prisoners had proper celebration. Local churches collected 4,800 gift packages. Schools contributed handmade cards. The American Legion, veterans who had fought Germans in 1918, donated cigarettes and sports equipment to current German enemies. The Christmas tree in the main compound stood 30 feet tall, decorated with electric lights burning continuously. Such electrical display would be unthinkable even in peacetime Germany. The Christmas feast included turkey, ham, sweet potatoes, stuffing, cranberry sauce, pie, and ice cream. Approximately 5,000 calories per man, while German civilians subsisted on 1,200 calories when available. Working in Texas exposed POWs to American racial dynamics that contradicted both Nazi propaganda and American reputation. At Camp Hearn, black soldiers from the 395th Infantry Regiment occasionally served guard duty. German POWs, products of racial ideology, found themselves taking orders from black Americans. Several prisoners requested transfers rather than submit to black authority, requests denied by camp administration. Yet prisoners also witnessed segregation's contradictions. They could eat in Hearn restaurants that refused service to the black soldiers guarding them. They attended movie theaters where their guards couldn't sit in the main section. German enemies had more social freedom in some contexts than American citizens who happened to be black. This paradox, being treated better than some Americans while being enemies, scrambled ideological certainty. 3 cases illustrate the transformation. Hermann Bucher arrived as a convinced Nazi. His memoir describes gradual ideological collapse through accumulated observations. The turning point came Christmas 1943 when Hearn citizens gave presents to enemy prisoners. He later wrote, "These people whose sons we had tried to kill gave us gifts. Their kindness wasn't weakness, but strength, the confidence of victors who knew they had already won not just the war, but the peace that would follow." Butcher emigrated to America in 1953 and worked for General Motors until retirement. Georg Gertner escaped in September 1945, but chose to remain in America illegally for 40 years, marrying an American woman and working as a tennis instructor. When he finally surrendered in 1985, he had been American longer than German. His story validates the transformative power of American society on even dedicated enemies. Reinhold Pabel escaped in 1945 out of curiosity about American life. He lived illegally in Chicago for 7 years, working in bookstores, before voluntarily surrendering in 1953. The FBI investigation revealed he had broken no laws except illegal entry. He received citizenship in 1959 and later sponsored other German immigrants. As Germany collapsed in spring 1945, American authorities prepared prisoners for repatriation to a destroyed homeland. Courses in civil administration prepared POWs for managing ruined cities. Agricultural training emphasized feeding starving populations. Medical personnel learned epidemic prevention. Engineers studied infrastructure reconstruction. By May 1945, 31,000 POWs were enrolled in vocational training, 18,000 studying English, 12,000 in agricultural programs. State Department officials visited camps explaining American intentions to rebuild rather than punish Germany. This incomprehensible generosity from victor to vanquished shattered final remnants of Nazi ideology. The Marshall Plan's concepts were explained to prisoners before public announcement, preparing them to support American aid when they returned home. The statistics tell the story. Of 425,000 German POWs in America, only 0.52% attempted escape, only 0.01% successfully. Work refusal occurred in 0.04% of cases, while 87% voluntarily participated in labor programs. Post-war surveys found 74% held favorable views of American democracy, 38% desired to emigrate to America, 23% maintained correspondence with American families. Former POWs occupied significant positions in reconstructed Germany. 48 became Bundestag members, 312 served as mayors. 1,847 worked in agricultural modernization, 1,241 taught in schools, 4,165 managed businesses using American methods. They brought back more than memories. They brought understanding of how democracy functions, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. Camp Hearn closed in December 1945, but connections endured. Christmas cards arrived annually until the last known prisoner died in 2001. In 1984, 50 former POWs returned to Texas for a reunion, embracing former guards and placing flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, speaking for the group, said, "We came as enemies believing in racial superiority and national destiny. We left as friends, understanding that democracy's chaos is its strength." The German POWs who reached America between 1943 and 1946 witnessed a society so confident it could afford mercy to enemies. They saw democracy functioning through apparent chaos, racial integration progressing despite segregation, women exercising authority while maintaining femininity, enemies becoming friends through simple humanity. These sights, mundane to Americans, but revolutionary to products of totalitarianism, accomplished what military defeat alone couldn't: complete ideological transformation. They expected to find a weak, divided nation and discovered instead a society whose strength lay in its contradictions. The transformation wasn't achieved through propaganda, but through reality. In Texas camps, where summer temperatures hit 110 degrees and winter brought ice storms, where prisoners picked cotton alongside black workers who outperformed them, where enemy soldiers received Christmas presents from civilians whose sons they'd fought, the Nazi worldview didn't collapse dramatically. It simply became irrelevant in the face of experienced reality. The unusual sights German POWs witnessed became the foundation for one of history's most successful transformations from enemy to ally. In their stunned observations lay seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and European democratic reconstruction. Their transformation proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration, not through hatred, but through humanity, not by breaking bodies, but by changing minds through the simple act of witnessing American life in all its messy, contradictory, incomprehensible glory. The reverberations of this transformation extended far beyond individual prisoners. When these men returned to occupied Germany in 1945 and 1946, they carried with them a virus of democracy that would prove impossible to contain. American occupation authorities, initially skeptical of using former POWs in reconstruction efforts, quickly recognized their value as interpreters, not just of language, but of American intentions and methods. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, a former Afrika Korps officer who spent 2 years at Camp Hearn, returned to become a key figure in rebuilding Stuttgart's municipal government. In a 1965 interview with American historians, he reflected, "We returned from America with more than memories. We brought knowledge of how democracy functions, how free markets operate, how diverse peoples cooperate. We had seen the future, and we knew it worked." The agricultural programs proved particularly transformative. Ernst Müller, who learned modern farming techniques at Camp Concordia, Kansas, returned to establish one of Bavaria's first agricultural cooperatives based on American models. Using hybrid seeds smuggled in Red Cross packages from American friends, he increased local crop yields by 300% within 2 years. His success sparked a movement. By 1950, over 200 agricultural cooperatives founded by former POWs operated across West Germany. The cultural impact was equally profound. Wilhelm Hoffmann, who played violin in the Camp Herne Orchestra, returned to establish youth music programs modeled on American high school bands. In America, I saw factory workers' children learning instruments, he wrote. Music wasn't reserved for the elite. This democratization of culture was as revolutionary as any political change. Former POWs became inadvertent ambassadors for American consumer culture. They described supermarkets where shoppers selected their own goods, revolutionary in a Europe of counter-service shops. They explained credit systems that let working families buy homes. They spoke of public libraries where anyone could borrow books without fee or political screening. These descriptions, more than any propaganda, made American society attractive to war-weary Europeans. The business methods learned in camp workshops and American factories transformed German industry. Kurt Wagner, who observed quality control procedures at a Texas cannery, returned to implement similar systems in Ruhr Valley steel mills. Americans taught us that worker satisfaction increased productivity more than fear, he noted. This simple truth rebuilt German industry faster than any machinery. Educational transformation continued through correspondence. The University of Kansas alone maintained letter exchanges with 400 former POWs through the 1950s. These weren't just pleasantries. Professors sent technical journals, agricultural bulletins, and business management texts. This informal education network helped rebuild German technical education on American models. The psychological impact on German society was subtle but pervasive. Former POWs challenged the authoritarian family structures that had enabled fascism. Heinrich Schmidt, imprisoned at Camp Fannin, Texas, returned to raise his children with American-influenced methods. I encouraged questions, rewarded independent thinking, allowed disagreement. My neighbors thought I was crazy until they saw my children's success. Women's roles became a particular point of transformation. Former POWs had witnessed American women's competence in various roles. Many returned advocating for women's education and employment. Friedrich Becker, who watched wasps flying military aircraft, supported his daughter's engineering studies despite family opposition. I had seen American women master complex machinery. Why shouldn't German women do the same? The impact on German-American relations was immediate and lasting. When Secretary of State George Marshall announced the European Recovery Program in 1947, former POWs became its most effective advocates. They had experienced American generosity firsthand and could counter Soviet propaganda about American imperialism. Their testimony that Americans had treated enemy prisoners better than Germany treated its own citizens carried unique credibility. Klaus Steinberg, a former U-boat officer imprisoned at Camp Papago Park, Arizona, became a liaison between German businesses and Marshall Plan administrators. My fellow Germans trusted me because I had been a prisoner, he explained. When I said Americans meant their promises, they believed me because I had no reason to lie. The religious transformation deserves special attention. Many POWs encountered genuine Christianity divorced from state power for the first time. Pastor Martin Schweitzer, imprisoned at Camp Carson, Colorado, returned to establish churches based on American Voluntary Association models. In America, I learned faith was personal choice, not state mandate. This freedom created stronger belief than any compulsion. Former POWs pioneered German-American city partnerships. Cologne's partnership with Indianapolis began when former Camp Atterbury prisoners contacted their guard's hometown. By 1960, over 50 such partnerships existed, most initiated by former POW connections. These relationships, built on personal friendships rather than diplomatic protocols, created lasting transatlantic bonds. The influence extended to German law enforcement. POWs had observed American police serving communities rather than controlling them. Hans Richter, who watched civilian police in Houston directing traffic and helping citizens, returned to reform Munich's police training. We learned that police effectiveness came from citizen cooperation, not fear. Labor relations transformed through POW observations. They had seen American workers strike without facing execution, negotiate with management as relative equals, and earn wages that permitted middle-class lifestyles. Former POWs established Germany's first American-style labor unions, emphasizing negotiation over confrontation. The architectural impact was visible in rebuilt German cities. POWs who worked construction in America returned with ideas about suburban development, shopping centers, and automobile-friendly design. The Wirtschaftswunder, Germany's economic miracle, owed much to former POWs who understood American consumer society and adapted its lessons to German Reconstruction. Even German cuisine showed American influence through former POWs. They introduced backyard barbecues, previously unknown in Germany. Supermarkets stocked products like peanut butter and cornflakes at former POWs' request. American-style diners opened in German cities, often run by men who had washed dishes in Texas truck stops. The transformation wasn't universally positive. Some former POWs returned so Americanized that they struggled to reintegrate. Marriages failed when wives couldn't understand husbands who now expected American-style partnerships rather than traditional German hierarchies. Children resented fathers who imposed American freedoms in authoritarian households. Critics accused returned POWs of cultural betrayal. Communist propagandists labeled them Coca-Cola Germans, corrupted by American materialism. Neo-Nazi groups considered them traitors who had abandoned racial consciousness for American multiculturalism. These attacks often backfired. Association with American success became a political asset rather than liability. The generational impact proved most lasting. Children of former POWs grew up with American influences, celebrating Halloween, introduced by fathers who remembered American children trick-or-treating outside camp gates, playing baseball, equipment sent by American friends, studying English, taught by fathers who insisted it was the future's language. By the 1960s, when these children reached adulthood, West Germany had become thoroughly Americanized, not through occupation or propaganda, but through thousands of personal transformations that began in POW camps. The student movements of 1968, demanding democracy and challenging authority, drew heavily on American examples their fathers had described. The Camp Hearn experience produced unexpected literary works. Beyond memoirs, former POWs wrote novels exploring German-American encounters. Hans Kirst's The Night of the Generals examined military authority through eyes opened by American democracy. Heinrich Böll, though not a POW himself, drew on returned prisoners' stories for works examining German Reconstruction. Academic studies proliferated. The University of Munich established an American Studies program in 1952, staffed partly by former POWs. These programs, spreading across German universities, created intellectual bridges that outlasted political alliances. Young Germans learned about America from professors who had experienced it as prisoners, a unique perspective that humanized former enemies. The business connections proved most durable. By 1970, over 300 German companies had American partnerships traceable to POW camp connections. Former prisoners who had learned American business methods became natural intermediaries. They understood both cultures, spoke both languages, literally and figuratively, and had personal credibility in both nations. Medical advances followed similar patterns. German doctors who had observed American medical practices in POW camps returned to modernize German health care. They introduced American concepts like preventive medicine, patient rights, and hospital hygiene standards. The German hospital system's post-war excellence owed much to lessons learned in camp infirmaries. Sports provided another transformation vector. POWs had discovered American sports like baseball and basketball. They returned to establish leagues that offered alternatives to militaristic gymnastics traditions. By 1955, over 100 German baseball teams existed, mostly founded by former POWs who had learned the game behind barbed wire. The influence on German media was profound. Former POWs who had read free American newspapers established publications modeled on American journalism. They introduced concepts like investigative reporting, editorial independence, and letters to editors. Der Spiegel magazine, founded in 1947, explicitly followed American news magazine formats introduced by former POWs. Perhaps most significantly, former POWs became democracy's foot soldiers in Cold War Germany. When Soviet propaganda portrayed American society as racist and exploitative, thousands of Germans could respond, "I was there, I saw differently." Their witness testimony, backed by personal experience, proved more powerful than any official counter-propaganda. The last reunions occurred in the early 2000s. Elderly former enemies, many now American citizens, visiting German relatives, or Germans visiting American friends, gathered to remember transformation rather than imprisonment. They had witnessed history's most successful re-education through exposure program, not because it was designed as such, but because American society's reality proved more powerful than any ideology. The final ledger showed remarkable returns on American generosity. The cost of maintaining German POWs, approximately $500 million in 1940s dollars, was repaid many times through former prisoners who facilitated American business in Europe, supported American policies during the Cold War, and raised children who saw America as friend rather than enemy. Today, few remember that nearly 500,000 German enemies lived in America during World War II. Their camps have vanished, returned to farmland, or developed into suburbs. But their influence persists in every German-American business partnership, every academic exchange, every military alliance that treats former enemies as future allies. The story of German POWs in America demonstrates that winning peace requires different weapons than winning war. Where bullets and bombs created enemies, abundance and freedom created allies. Where hatred divided, humanity united. Where ideology insisted on eternal conflict, daily experience proved coexistence possible. In the end, the German POWs' American experience validated democracy's essential premise, that free societies are stronger than authoritarian ones, not despite their openness, but because of it. By treating enemies as potential friends, by showing rather than telling, by living their values rather than merely proclaiming them, Americans transformed 425,000 enemies into ambassadors for the American way of life. The camps closed, the prisoners went home, but the transformation endured. In farms across Bavaria, where American methods tripled yields, in factories along the Rhine where workers were partners rather than pawns, in schools throughout Germany where questioning replaced memorization, the legacy lived on. The German POWs had come to America as enemies. They returned as converts to a simple truth: that freedom works. Their story reminds us that the deepest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in hearts and minds. The unusual sights that stunned German POWs, racial integration, women's liberation, democratic chaos, material abundance, and simple human kindness extended to enemies, weren't unusual at all. They were merely American society being itself, and that proved more revolutionary than any propaganda could have been.